The first step is simply going to be enabling Rtc and seeing what breaks. So I can edit the configuration, I'm going to make the value of the init prop an empty object. Then I'm going to use the object spread syntax to expand the values from the existing config object. I specify the plugins property after the spread object so I can override it. I set the value of the plugins property to be the string rtc space with the value of the plugins property from the config object appended. As I save the file, the React project will automatically build. Note that this next problem I demonstrate will only occur if you are running a version of TinyMCE prior to 5.9. I will now refresh the web browser showing the app to see if that works successfully. My first impression is that it worked. The editor has loaded. However, in this case, the first impression is deceptive. To demonstrate why, I need to open the JavaScript console. In the console it says, failed to load plugin Rtc from the URL plugins/rtc/plugin.min.js. Prior to TinyMCE 5.9, Rtc is not included with the default cloud channel. If you see this error, the solution is to specify a different cloud channel. Switching back to the editor, add the cloud channel prop and set its value to the string 5-dev. Save the file. Switch back to the web browser and refresh the page. There is a failure to load Rtc, and it says, failed to load Rtc configuration settings. More information may be available in the console. In the console, there is more information. It says, configuration is missing, required Rtc document ID setting. Configuration is missing, required Rtc Token Provider setting. And configuration is missing, required Rtc Encryption Provider setting. I will need to provide all three settings. Firstly, the Rtc document ID. Its purpose is to uniquely identify the document to the Rtc server. Specify an Rtc document ID property after the plugins property. Set the value of the Rtc document ID property to be the document ID value that was extracted from the page URL. This works as the Rtc document ID is just a unique textual value, and we are already using a unique document ID to retrieve other pieces of information. Save the file, switch back to the web browser, and refresh the page. Unsurprisingly, it still fails to load as we are still missing two required properties, but it's no longer asking for the Rtc document ID, which I just provided. The next setting requested is Rtc Token Provider. Its purpose is to help identify a user as having access to documents linked to your API key. I will start with a basic implementation, which I will revisit. Specify an Rtc Token Provider property after the Rtc Document ID property. Set the value of the Rtc Token Provider property to be an inline function. Set the input to be an object with the property document ID. Set the return value to be a resolved promise. Set the promise value to be an object. Add a property token to the object. Set the value of token to the JWT with the same name that was passed as a prop to document edit. Token must be a JSON Web Token with the standard fields of sub, exp, and IET. It must not be expired, not issued in the future, and also must be signed with a key pair that has been associated with your TinyMCE API key. The JWT used for login satisfies those requirements, but future releases will require additional fields that will make a JWT that is specific to the document and that specifies the user's role, so we will return to this setting in a later step. Save the file, switch back to the web browser, and refresh the page. As expected, it still fails to load. However, it now only requests the Rtc encryption provider setting. The Rtc plugin uses the Rtc encryption provider to return an encryption key. This hides the content of your document from the Rtc server and any third parties that might intercept communications. I'll provide a stub implementation and then return to this later to provide a secure implementation. Specify an Rtc encryption provider property after the Rtc Token Provider property. Set the value of the Rtc encryption provider property to be an inline function. Set the input to be an object with the properties document ID and key hint. Note the key hint property is optional and may be null. Set the return value to be a resolved promise of an object. The output object has two required properties, key and key hint. Set the key property of the object to the string. This is not secure. Fix me. The key is the encryption key that will be used to encrypt the document. Set the key hint property of the object to a string containing the ISO 8601 date and time for the Unix epoch, as we will be using creation times to represent keys. The key hint is stored with the encrypted messages and allows the client to request the same key in future. Save the file, switch back to the web browser, and refresh the page. The editor has successfully loaded, but we are not done yet.